Sundance Kid. Harry Longabaugh shifted in the saddle, feeling the familiar ache in his lower back that came from 3 days of hard riding through Wyoming's red desert. His horse, a sturdy buckskin with more sense than most men he'd known, picked its way carefully through the sagebrush and alkali dust, heading toward the cluster of false-fronted buildings that marked the town of Sundance. At 22, Harry had already spent more time on the wrong side of the law than most men twice his age. His face still carried the smoothness of youth, but his pale blue eyes held the wariness of someone who'd learned early that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. The Colt .45 on his hip wasn't for show. He'd used it 4 times in the past 2 years, and each time the other man had been considerably slower to clear leather. Sundance wasn't much to look at in the dying light of an October afternoon. Maybe 24 buildings scattered along a single dirt street, with the inevitable saloon, general store, and livery stable that marked every cow town from Montana to New Mexico. But it had 2 things Harry needed: a telegraph office and a sheriff who was rumored to be more interested in poker than law enforcement. The telegram in Harry's shirt pocket was 3 days old, written in the careful code he and his associates used when conducting business across state lines. Translated, it meant that a certain Union Pacific payroll train would be carrying $20,000 through the Laramie Mountains in 5 days' time. More importantly, it would be traveling with only 2 guards, both of whom were known to be more comfortable with whiskey bottles than Winchester rifles. Harry tied his horse to the hitching post in front of the Antlers saloon and paused to study the street. A few local cowboys were making their evening rounds, and an old man was sweeping dust from the front of the Mercantile with the methodical persistence of someone who had nothing better to do. Normal enough for a town this size, but Harry had learned to notice things that didn't fit, like the man in the dark suit sitting on the hotel porch reading a newspaper that was 2 weeks old. The Antlers was about what Harry expected: sawdust on the floor, a bar made from pine planks, and the smell of tobacco smoke mixed with unwashed humanity. The bartender was a fat man with suspicious eyes and hands that stayed visible on the bar top. 3 local drinkers were arguing about cattle prices at a corner table, and a card game was in progress near the back wall. "Whiskey," Harry said, laying a silver dollar on the bar. The bartender poured without comment, but Harry could feel the man's eyes cataloging everything from his clothes to his gun rig to the way he held himself. Small-town bartenders were like that. They survived by knowing which strangers were just passing through and which ones might bring trouble. "Traveling far?" the bartender asked, making conversation the way bartenders did when they wanted information. "Far enough," Harry replied, which wasn't really an answer but would have to do. That's when the man in the dark suit walked in. Harry recognized him immediately, though they'd never been formally introduced. Thomas Siringo, Pinkerton detective, manhunter, and the man who'd been tracking Harry's movements for the better part of 6 months. Siringo was maybe 40, with the lean build of a man who lived in the saddle and the careful eyes of someone who made his living studying other people's weaknesses. "Evening," Siringo said to the bartender, settling himself at the bar about 6 feet from Harry. "Whiskey, if you please." The bartender poured, but Harry could see the man's nervousness in the way his hands shook slightly. Having 2 armed strangers in his establishment at the same time was probably more excitement than the Antlers usually saw in a month. "Nice town," Siringo observed, making conversation. "Quiet. The kind of place a man could settle down, raise a family, stay out of trouble." Harry sipped his whiskey and said nothing, but his right hand drifted closer to his gun butt. Siringo was playing some kind of game, and Harry had learned that games with Pinkerton men usually ended badly for everyone except the Pinkertons. "Course," Siringo continued, "some men aren't cut out for quiet lives. Some men seem to attract trouble wherever they go." "That's a fact," Harry agreed, meeting Siringo's eyes in the mirror behind the bar. "Trouble has a way of finding a man, whether he's looking for it or not." The card game in the back had gone quiet, the players sensing the tension that was building between the two strangers. Even the cowboys arguing about cattle prices had stopped talking, their attention focused on the bar where two men were having a conversation that sounded friendly but felt like the beginning of a funeral. "Harry Longabaugh," Siringo said quietly. "Also known as Harry Alonzo, Harry Place, and probably half a dozen other names I haven't figured out yet." Harry finished his whiskey and set the glass down carefully. "You seem to know a lot about a man you've never met. I know you robbed the Great Northern Express car outside Malta, Montana last spring. I know you and your associates made off with $8,000 and left the express messenger with a bullet in his shoulder. I know you've been seen in the company of Robert Leroy Parker, also known as Butch Cassidy, and that your gang has been planning something big for the Union Pacific Line." The accuracy of Siringo's information was troubling, but Harry kept his face neutral. "That's a lot of knowing for one man to carry around. It's my job to know things, just like it's my job to bring men like you to justice." Harry turned to face Siringo directly, his hand now resting openly on his gun butt. "And just how do you plan to do that, detective?" Siringo smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Well, I could try to arrest you right here, right now. But that would probably result in a lot of noise and bleeding, and I'd hate to disturb the peaceful citizens of Sundance with that kind of unpleasantness. Considerate of you. Or," Siringo continued, "I could make you a proposition." Harry waited. "There's a federal judge in Cheyenne who's willing to deal. You give up Parker and the rest of your associates, testify about their activities, and you walk away with a suspended sentence and a new identity. Fresh start, clean slate, chance to become the kind of man your mother probably hoped you'd be." The offer hung in the air like gun smoke. Harry could feel every eye in the saloon watching him, waiting to see how he'd respond to the Pinkertons' proposal. "That's generous," Harry said finally. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Just a chance for a young man to choose a different path before it's too late." Harry considered this. He'd been expecting something like this ever since word had reached him that the Pinkertons were actively hunting his gang. But he'd also been hoping he'd have more time to plan, to organize, to set up the kind of score that would let him retire from the outlaw business entirely. "How long do I have to think about it?" he asked. "About as long as it takes me to finish this whiskey," Siringo replied. "After that, we do this the hard way." That's when the shooting started. The first shot came from the doorway, where a man Harry didn't recognize had appeared with a sawed-off shotgun in his hands. The blast took out 2 bottles behind the bar and sent the bartender diving for cover. Harry rolled sideways, drawing his Colt as he moved, but Siringo was already in motion, his own weapon appearing in his hand with professional speed. The shotgun roared again, but Harry was no longer where the gunman expected him to be. His return shot took the stranger in the chest, spinning him around and sending him crashing through the batwing doors onto the wooden sidewalk outside. "Federal marshals," someone shouted from the street. "Surrender or be shot down." Harry looked at Siringo, who was crouched behind an overturned table with his gun trained on the doorway. "Your friends?" "Not mine," Siringo replied grimly. "Looks like someone else has an interest in your future." The card players and cowboys were scrambling for cover as more gunfire erupted from the street. Harry counted at least 4 different weapons, which meant they were badly outnumbered. The smart play would be to surrender, but Harry had heard too many stories about outlaws who'd been shot while trying to escape to trust his life to the mercy of federal lawmen. "Back door?" he asked the bartender who was cowering behind his bar. "Through the storage room," the man squeaked, pointing toward a doorway behind the card tables. Harry and Siringo moved together, covering each other as they worked their way toward the rear of the saloon. It was an odd partnership, the hunter and the hunted, united by the immediate need to stay alive. The storage room was cramped and dark, filled with barrels of whiskey and cases of bottled beer. But it had what Harry was looking for: a back door that opened onto the alley behind the saloon. "After you," Siringo said, gesturing toward the door. Harry smiled grimly. "You first, detective. I wouldn't want you to get the wrong idea about my intentions." They emerged into the alley to find two more men waiting for them. Federal marshals by their appearance, both armed with rifles and positioned to cover the back exit. But they were expecting one man, not two, and their moment of confusion was all Harry needed. His first shot dropped the marshal on the left, the bullet taking the man high in the chest and spinning him into the wooden wall of the adjacent building. Siringo's gun boomed simultaneously, and the second marshal went down clutching his shoulder and cursing in language that would have made a mule skinner blush. "This way," Harry said, heading toward the back of the hotel where he'd left his horse. But the buckskin was gone, probably spooked by the gunfire, and run off into the gathering darkness. Harry cursed under his breath and looked around for alternatives. "There," Siringo said, pointing toward a small corral behind the livery stable where several horses were milling nervously. They ran for the corral, bullets whining around them, as more lawmen appeared at both ends of the alley. Harry vaulted the fence and grabbed the reins of a paint mare that looked like she had some speed in her. Siringo chose a bay gelding that was dancing sideways with fear but seemed sound enough for a hard ride. "Where are we going?" Siringo asked as they mounted up. "Away from here," Harry replied, spurring his stolen horse toward the open prairie that stretched beyond the town limits. They rode hard for the first 5 miles, pushing their horses through sagebrush and alkali dust until the lights of Sundance disappeared behind them. Only then did Harry slow to a walk and look back at his unlikely companion. "Why'd you help me back there?" he asked. Siringo shrugged. "Professional courtesy. Besides, I don't like being bushwhacked any more than you do." "Who were they?" "Local law, probably. Maybe someone put a bounty on your head that was big enough to make them forget about due process." Harry considered this. Bounty hunters were even less predictable than federal marshals, and considerably more likely to shoot first and worry about legal niceties afterward. "That offer you made," he said, "about testifying against Parker and the others. Was that real?" "Real as anything else in this business," Siringo replied. "But it expires at sunrise. After that, I go back to hunting you the hard way." They rode in silence for another mile before Harry made his decision. "No deal," he said finally. "I don't sell out my friends, not even to save my own neck." Siringo nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. "I figured as much. You're not the type." "What type am I?" "The loyal type. The kind of man who'd rather die with his friends than live with betraying them. It's admirable in its way. Also stupid, but admirable." Harry laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Stupid seems to be my specialty." They reached a crossroads where the trail split 3 ways, north toward Montana, east toward the Black Hills, and south toward Colorado. Harry pulled up his horse and turned to face the Pinkerton detective. "This is where we part company," he said. Siringo checked his pocket watch in the moonlight. 3 hours until sunrise. That's a decent head start, considering. Decent enough. Harry paused, studying the man who'd been hunting him for months. "Why'd you really help me back there?" "Maybe because I respect a man who sticks by his principles, even when they're going to get him killed. Maybe because I'm getting tired of this business and the kind of people it turns men into." Siringo shrugged. "Or maybe I just didn't like the odds." Harry extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Siringo shook it. "Give my regards to Parker when you see him," the detective said. "Tell him he's got good taste in associates." "I'll do that." Harry turned his horse south and rode into the darkness, leaving Thomas Siringo sitting alone at the crossroads. Behind him, the town of Sundance was still lit up with the lanterns and torches of the manhunt that would continue until dawn. 3 days later, Harry met up with Butch Cassidy and the rest of the Wild Bunch at their hideout in the hole in the wall. When Butch asked about the Union Pacific job they'd been planning, Harry just shook his head. "Too hot," he said. "We need to lay low for a while, let things cool down." "What happened to you, anyway?" Butch asked, noting the haunted look in his young associate's eyes. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Harry thought about that night in Sundance. The gunfight, the chase, the strange partnership with a Pinkerton detective who'd given him a chance to escape. He thought about the choice he'd made, and the price he'd probably pay for it somewhere down the road. "You could say that," he replied finally. "Met a man in Sundance who showed me something about myself I didn't know was there." "What's that?" Harry smiled, but there was sadness in it. "That I'd rather be a live outlaw than a dead honest man. But I'd rather be a dead outlaw than a living traitor." From that day forward, the other members of the Wild Bunch started calling him the Sundance Kid, after the town where Harry Longabaugh had faced his demons and chosen his fate. The name stuck, the way names do when they capture something essential about a man's character. And in the years that followed, as the Wild Bunch robbed banks and trains across the American West, Thomas Siringo would sometimes read about their exploits in the newspapers and remember a young man who'd chosen loyalty over survival at a crossroads in the Wyoming darkness. The kid would never know it, but Siringo always hoped he'd made the right choice. Wild Western Rip Campbell Adventures. Duckfoot Ranch. Pecan Creek War. Scatter Shot. $10 Mustang. Pistol Whipped. Red River Ferry. Last Drop. Cow Puncher. Bearcat Pass. Fast Shot. As Good as Gold. Ramble Range. Claim Jumper. Gunpowder Trouble. Bushwhack Range. Bearwash War. Kicking Dust. Outlaw Range. Six Gun Preacher. Or grab one half of these in the box set on Amazon. Saddle up. Want all 30 Wild Western novels in one massive box set bundle? There are even more Wild Western adventures waiting on you at the pass. Head 'em off.